This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to the 33rd Right and Left Discussion Forum. The purpose of our discussion forum is to show that rational people can disagree without being disagreeable. We know from experience that when we hold our convictions lightly while listening to others, we can devote our full attention to different ideas and consider them along with our own. In this way, we all become enriched. Our panel today is going to consider the subject of intolerance in general, and the recent cases of potential college commencement speakers being canceled or withdrawn because of student and faculty protests. Our panel today, beginning on my left, is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. On his left is Patty Haskins, retired high school math teacher and current member of the Wadsworth City Council. On her left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. And on his left is Dr. Bruce Darlington, retired senior research scientist, and like Patty is a member of the Wadsworth City Council. Bryan, as you know, there have been several cases of college commencement speakers that have been withdrawn or disinvited because their appearance was protested by some students and faculty who disagreed with some of their past opinions or decisions. Some regard this as a step backward in our American traditions of tolerance and free speech. What are your thoughts?
I would agree. I think we're running headlong into a real issue here. I would use the term institutions of higher learning loosely, because it seems that if you don't agree with the politic, if you will, on the particular university campus, then you're shouted down, you're disinvited, you're labeled, and I don't think that belongs in our society at all. Our group here, I think, is a good model of being able to agree to disagree. And unfortunately, on a college campus, I'm wondering if this group would even be able to meet and discuss something in a public forum. Because, if you don't go along with the particular group that's been oppressed. I read all the articles. I've been following this issue closely. It's a travesty. And when we don't step up in a unified voice, right and left, to denounce this behavior and to denounce the people that are behind it, then we're going to reap the whirlwind. And we are beginning to see that. When you have individuals, the head of the IMF, a very well-regarded woman, in her field, withdraws her invitation and says, no, I'm sorry, I'm not coming to the university because it's creating such a polarizing event. Condoleezza Rice, no matter what your politics are, I think you can at least give her the respect. She withdrew her invitation to speak. I believe it was at Rutgers. Mm-hmm. And the list goes on. I mean, even the past president of Berkeley, that bastion of liberal thought, was, withdrew his invitation because the university that had invited him, the students were so upset that he used force to remove some people from the college, administrative building. So where does that leave us? I mean, this is almost reaching the point of being intolerable. And as right and left, we need to get together and say, no, we are not for that. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, our president and his administration, they get involved in everything, it seems, from a beer summit for the professor and the policeman not too long ago, and all these things, has been very quiet on this.
It was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago, yeah. I mean, he inserts himself in everything, the minutia of the country, but he says nothing about this. And this really goes right to the issue of being intolerant and not listening to people, not be willing to listen to people, and shouting them down, in essence, on the public square. And it has to stop. And I think people need to look at it for what it is. It has nothing to do with public discourse. It has no place in our system. And I don't know how much, how more forceful you can be. It has to stop.
You're not exactly on the fence on this issue.
No, I'm not
are
on the
you?
fence.
But Patty, where do you stand?
I agree with some of what Bryan said, and other things I disagree with. First of all, I'm not sure that Condoleezza Rice not being, and again, she was not asked to leave. She did.
Yes.
She did pull herself out because she felt it would be a distraction to the university if she were to speak there. I'm not sure that that's an issue that President Obama needs to become involved in, because I think he has other issues that he needs to work on rather than that. As far as, and this whole issue started with Rutgers. Now, Rutgers was not, as Bryan said, the only university where this has happened, and where there's been, groups that have come about and said, hey, we do not want that person speaking here. I agree with Bryan. Condoleezza Rice, I would love to listen to her. She is a very intelligent, well-spoken woman. I think that has, with the experience as Secretary of State, I think is wonderful. The interesting thing to me, though, however, is the location. This is a college graduation where, to me, a college graduation commencement speech should not be about your political views or the way the country should turn. I think that it should be an inspirational speech which motivates students. It is not an event where students are just showing up to hear the listed speaker. They have to listen to them if they wish to get their diploma at graduation.
They have to at least sit there and be quiet.
They have to sit there and be quiet. Now, I have a little bit of experience with Rutgers, as my daughter earned her first degree from Rutgers University. It is a liberal campus. For example, the college itself, the main campus in New Brunswick, is divided into 4 colleges. One of them, Douglas, is actually a college of women's studies, and they have always been on the forefront of liberal ideas. So, perhaps they might have chosen someone from that stance. I'm not sure. What they did choose, though, when Condoleezza Rice chose not to come, is they had former Governor Thomas Keene speak. It was interesting because he chose to take the $35,000 honorarium that was to be paid for the speaker and chose to donate it for scholarships. But even more importantly, I think they decided to have as the additional speaker who actually represented the students be Eric LeGrand, who was a football player from Rutgers, who was injured in a football game and is paralyzed from the neck down, and is now working basically as an inspirational speaker. And I think that's the type of thing that you have. I also think that as far as like commencement speeches, I'm not sure that's the best place to talk about intolerance, because I think it is up to the university to decide who they want to speak. You go to Oral Roberts University, they're not going to ask Hillary Clinton to come in and give their commencement speech, and I guarantee if they did, there would be the same type of complaints. This year's was Michelle Bachmann, who obviously is a good choice. She was a graduate of Oral Roberts, excellent choice. And this type of thing has gone on both sides. Notre Dame, if you recall, back in 2009, right after Barack Obama was elected, had asked Barack Obama to come and give the commencement speech. Here you have the President of the United States coming to give your commencement speech. And there was all kinds of discourse about a great deal from the Council of Catholic Bishops, one of whom wanted to change the name of Notre Dame because they didn't feel that it professed Catholic views. Now, yes, I thought that might have been a bit extreme.
You can't get any more Catholic than Notre Dame, can you?
That's true.
I'd just like to insert myself here for a second. I would agree that what side you're on, it has to stop.
It
has to stop. And if you can't have an individual like Condoleezza Rice come, and I'm sure she's smart enough to know, because she's been in that environment, what type of speech she needs to give. And I've sat through 3 college commencements so far, 4, including my own. And most of the commencement speakers come and they don't talk about politics. They talk about your future.
And that's what they should do. Yes,
and I'm sure they would. But when that person doesn't even get the opportunity because of some past discretion, some oppressed group that
or just
does some sort of boycott.
politics.
I mean that really shuts down that
Yeah.
discussion.
Well, and that's where I do agree with you, Bryan, on that. And I think we have to first of all understand that intolerance does not mean you have to agree with somebody. And to be tolerant, I think, means that you listen to other people. I mean, too many times we have this egoism that we are the only ones that know what's right. And everything we think or say is right. And forgetting that the other side has something to say and something to listen to. And that's what we need to start doing. Also, the way in which you protest. I think there was a great concern, particularly in the case of Rutgers, at the way those who were opposed to it
Didn't that include a chemistry professor?
a chemistry professor who
That's what I
was
thought, Ron.
sending out emails to the students saying not to show up and so forth.
Yeah.
20 years ago, you would voice your protest in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
But maybe the better way is, if you may not like the speaker. I mean, Rutgers had Snooki. I mean, hello. I mean, this is not.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably would have protested that, but
On moral grounds or something.
I think
Yeah.
the IQs of everyone listening may have dropped a few points that day. So,
Patty, you can't say that.
oh, excuse
You've
me.
just offended a group of people that believe in Snooki.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're
And
probably
don't-
going to get a lot of emails.
You really like her, don't
No,
you?
it's not me. I mean,
I'm totally lost. I've never heard of Snooki.
And my admiration for you just went up.
yeah.
There are several points.
Is it
in my
a
estimate.
singer, an entertainer?
No, she was
What
on.
is
A,
it?
She was on a reality show
Yeah.
called Jersey Shore, and then later on Dancing with the Stars. And she was a pop figure for a little bit. Still is. She just announced her second pregnancy and released the sonograms on the internet.
She had her 15 minutes of fame.
So you're,
I'm glad I'm
yeah,
isolated.
you could be out of the
Good.
loop on this one.
Yeah.
Ron, where do you come
Well-
down on this subject?
Couple of things go on here. I'm not surprised at university protests. When you're 20 years old, you know everything.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that in a way. What I am surprised about and concerns me greatly is the fact that professors get in on this. They should know better. They should be. I went to a liberal arts undergrad school. I didn't have time in grad school to worry about that stuff at Penn State. But
Virginia out of public school or private?
it was a private school.
Private, yeah.
And there was an open atmosphere there. We had people around. It was an opportunity to hone your intellectual skills, talking with other students. I'm from a small town in Pennsylvania. I didn't know anybody. Here I'm meeting here's a guy from Israel. He's a Palestinian who was his family was displaced when the Israelis took over. He was from Jerusalem. Here's some Jewish folks. I didn't know any Jewish people except caddying for some on the golf course. A lot of broadening influences, and that was a great place and time for it. I don't know that kids are interested in that now, and that disturbs me a little bit. I think intolerance in a philosophical way. I think this comes pretty much out of our territoriality of our natures. This is mine. This is what I believe. This is my comfort zone, and I'm going to be threatened if somebody takes me out of that. Having said that, I think protest at a university, whatever form it may take, is a healthful thing. I think that this is necessary in a democratic society, that you speak your displeasure in some way or another. To the extent of getting something canceled or boycotting something, well, there are things on both sides of that. Basically, these later university things amount to a boycott in a way. I think you have to temper that. You really do have to temper that, and I agree with Bryan and Patty as well that this is not a good thing in our society. That we really do need to practice this. And tolerance doesn't mean just turning the other cheek. Doesn't mean just ignoring what's uncomfortable. Tolerance means, as Patty says, listening to one another. Or maybe Bryan said that. Bryan would probably agree. Listening to one another and trying to discuss and trying to air out your differences.
But Ron, when you think about a university or any institution of higher learning being a bustling forum of ideas and a place for free-willing discussion, and exchange of thoughts and all. Protesting seems to be to put a damper on all of that.
Yeah, in some ways.
Yeah.
In some
I mean,
ways, yes.
you know, I think that everybody's got a right to voice their opinion. If it comes across sounding like a protest, so be it. But when it interferes with the idea of this bustling bazaar of ideas,
yeah. And I agree, that goes too far.
Yeah.
That goes too far.
Yeah.
I know we have to listen to Bruce yet, but in 1968 I was at Akron University, and George Wallace was running for president.
Yeah.
And I've always been a liberal, but I thought, you know, I need to hear what this man says. And of course, we didn't have all the Twitter and internet then, but pretty good idea that I didn't agree with him, but I thought I owe him
Absolutely.
that respect to go and listen. Now, when I went to hear him, and it was in downtown Akron, I walked down from the university and listened to him. There were placards everywhere. Hitler in 38, Wallace in 68, this type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was difficult to listen to him. And that was upsetting to me because, you know, give the man a chance to speak. You don't have to agree with him. Sure. You don't have to vote for him, but at least listen.
So you're a tolerant progressive.
I hope so. I really hope so.
Bruce, you've listened to 3 people now. What do you think?
Well, I guess I grew up, I'm older than the rest of you, so I kind of grew up in a different age because I went to a small liberal arts college too. I never heard any protests. I mean, the dean was the king, and what the dean said, you did. And if you didn't agree, you were out. So I guess that sort of stymied. But we respected the dean. And I think this intolerance that's on campuses now stems from a lack of respect. The students that have not grown up, I believe, in an aura of respect. So they figure that their rights are their own and they don't have to respect the rights of anyone else. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I find it difficult. The first time I really ran into this, I guess, was when I moved to Ohio and they had the Kent State riots and the protests. That was really my first indication of protests. And it's, you know, it's grown from there. It's still, it seems like students, rightly or wrongly, are more interested in protesting than they are in learning. And this is bad for the country because you have to respect all sides. You have to, if you don't have diversity in your learning, you're not going to be a well-rounded individual.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Mm-hmm. And be able to contribute to society. So I find it very difficult to understand. Each side should have their own opportunity to present their views, and it should be respected.
Mm-hmm. Putting a different spin on this, there are a lot of universities that continue to have speech codes. There are certain things that you cannot say because they're likely to be offensive to other people. But that has gone, on private universities at least, it's gone from about 75% back in the 70s and 80s down to about 62% now that actually have speech codes. Most of them have been sued and got rid of the code because it's considered unconstitutional. There are codes that are prohibiting speech that is protected by the First Amendment in the public square. But on average, universities get sued 22 times a year. Some interesting numbers pop up here. But 22 times a year based on these speech codes. They almost all settle, and they almost all eliminate their speech codes because they're so grievously against the First Amendment. But I would like to think, though, that we hit some kind of a nadir in the 60s when it comes to student protests, and in the 70s and 80s that morphed into political correctness and so forth. I'd like to think that we're getting more mature now, becoming more tolerant, and being and less polarized, at least at the university level. And am I getting a sense that?
No, that's not correct. No, that your sense is wrong, because what's replaced that is the new political correctness.
Would you please tolerate my sense, though, for just a moment?
I'm going to tolerate that, but I don't want to offend you and have you go off, filing a lawsuit because I've offended you because you're a white male and you're over the age of 50. You have trigger warnings now. I don't know if you read that one article. The one college has instituted trigger warnings that if your book or a professor is going to discuss something in class that might offend someone, you're required to notify those people that there's a possibility that you could be offended. One of the articles brought up that all those protests that took part in, that all the people that took part in those protests back in the 60s are now professors. And they don't want people to hear the other side. They're the ones that are least tolerant. So this notion that somehow our college campuses are becoming more tolerant is obvious that it's not happening. And when we have these flare-ups, we have to step up as right and left people that have different opinions. I don't disagree with any. I agree with most of what I've heard here. But the fact is that I'm tolerant enough to listen. I'm not shouting Patty down. I didn't boycott this meeting. I didn't create a protest online because I don't want to listen to Bruce. I came here knowing that people were going to listen. We might not agree. I'm going to walk out feeling like my opinion was heard, whether you agree with it or not. And I'm sure Patty feels the same way.
Absolutely.
So,
Of course, I was one of those students in the 60s during the Kent State hearings and all of that. So some of us did not, it did evolve into tolerant people, hopefully. I think one of the concerns as far as tolerance, though, too, is the media that we have now. If you watch the cable news networks, it seems to be the norm for the person doing the interview to shout down the person on the other side if they disagree with them. I mean, how many times have we watched an interview, and this is on all of the networks, where you can't understand because each one is talking over the other. And that is what we are showing our young people as the way to discuss issues. Rather than sitting down in a civil forum, let's shout each other down and not listen to one another. And that, to me, is total intolerance.
I think we've gone over the edge on, it's one thing to disagree with somebody and to consider them wrong, but we consider them evil.
Right.
Good point.
and you're labeled.
Good way to put that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's a difficult thing for us to live with going forward with all the problems that we have to
Look at
solve.
the way our government runs. We look, people decide how to vote on an issue, whether it's supported by an R or a D, or whether it's a conservative or a liberal. Instead of sitting down and agreeing to something that works for everyone, we have isolated ourselves into those little cubby holes and refuse to listen to the other side.
Yeah. Speaking of Akron U, back in the 60s, I was an older student, and I was on campus at Akron U on May 4th, 1970. And that there was a van with a New Jersey license plate and a sound system that pulled across the lawn and set up shop on the front steps of Bookdale Hall that day. Were you there?
I was there, yes.
Oh, I remember this one genius standing up at a microphone, young lady, and said, "We are not asking for miracles. We're only asking for workable solutions to the world's problems." I thought, "Oh, sweetheart."
That's a miracle.
The interesting thing is Akron U is very conservative. I mean, for 2 years, all the males there had to take ROTC, if you recall.
Yeah.
So,
I didn't, because I was in the Army before I was.
okay. But I know there was a group on campus that wanted to sponsor an anti-war rally, and they had to get a permit from the university. And when they went to the university to ask for that, they were told they could only do that if they had a speaker from the opposing side speak at the same time. It was a little different atmosphere than, say, at Kent State. So.
Do you remember that little building where all the student mailboxes were?
Oh yeah,
right
they
in
turned into the computer room then.
Is it?
Eventually, yes. It was
There was, you know,
computer room when I
at the
Yeah.
time, in May of 1970, on Front Street in Cuyahoga Falls in a storefront, there was a cell of it was the American Nazi Party. They picked that day to come down and jam all those student mailboxes with hate literature. I mean, they were working real hard to get something going. And at the same time, Sheriff Campbell, the Summit County Sheriff, he was looking to get his budget increased, and one of the justifications for increasing the budget was to help put down the riots at Akron U. Well, there hadn't been any, but so he tried to start one, and it was a brutal time. It really was, but I'd like to think that we're making progress. That the controversies over these recent, there have been 5 notable, either withdrawing invitations or succumbing to protests. I'd like to think that the conversation, that we're having a national conversation, is going to shed a little bit of light on what intolerance really is doing at the university
do people
level.
really think they wouldn't have learned something from Condoleezza Rice?
Yeah.
I mean, that's mind-boggling to me. And I'm a liberal, so.
Yeah. Well, John, you say maybe it takes it an egregious sort of circumstance that's got it turning around, and I think probably a lot of people were talking about the Condoleezza Rice incident and the other ones and saying, is this right? Does this go on? I don't know. Well, Bruce, you know, you say you're older than the rest of us, but you and I are from the same era, and we both grew up in small towns, yes? And I know nobody really preached tolerance to me, but my parents showed me this by example.
Well, you know, it was understood that you tolerated.
You tolerated and you respected. And I think that's a good part of it, respect. I agree with
I guess the latest thing that shocked me, and it shocked me from the start, was, you know, the Brown versus Board of Education occurred in Topeka. You know. Well, the school I went to, we played all the teams up in Topeka, and they were all integrated except for Topeka High School. And that was the one that caused the problem. And now Michelle Obama was going to go out there and speak to those people, and they shouted her down.
Well, we've only got 30 seconds left, or I would correct you on exactly what happened in Topeka. She didn't get shouted down. They wanted to combine all the high schools into one thing, and there were complaints because they weren't going to have seats. But in any event, thanks. This conversation is over.
That's
I'd like to leave you with this quote from Frederick Douglass, who's one of the few genuine, true American heroes. "To suppress freedom of speech is a double wrong. It violates the rights of the hearer as well as those of the speaker." Thank you, Frederick. Thank you, panel.